You know how it is. You want to stay informed, you're curious about the big stories, but sometimes it feels like information overload.
Definitely. It's hard to keep up.
Well, recently, something really fascinating popped up on my radar. Colossal Biosciences.
Mhm.
The company working on the woolly mammoth.
Ah, yes, Colossal. I've been following their work. What's the latest?
They're saying they've resurrected the dire wolf.
Wow, the dire wolf, like the actual Enocean dirus.
Exactly. Now, for anyone who's seen Game of Thrones, that name probably conjures up these huge, almost mythical creatures.
Right, the ghost comparisons. But the real dire wolf was a serious predator. Roamed North America during the Pleistocene. We're talking tens of thousands of years ago.
A really significant part of that ancient ecosystem.
Absolutely. And the idea of bringing back an animal extinct for, what, over 12,000 years? It really does blur the line between science fact and science fiction, doesn't it?
It really does. So to understand what Colossal's actually done, we've been looking at reports from CNN, the Times of India, Medindia, trying to sort of cut through the headlines.
Good idea.
Yeah.
Because the initial reports can sound pretty sensational.
Yeah. So for you, our aim in this deep dive is to look beyond the hype. What exactly has Colossal Biosciences managed? How similar are these, well, new animals to the original dire wolf?
And what are the bigger implications, the ripple effects of this kind of science?
Exactly. Okay, let's unpack this, starting with the announcement itself and these new arrivals everyone's talking about.
Right, so Colossal announced the birth of 3 dire wolf pups.
3 of them.
Yes. 2 males named Remus and Romulus. They were born back in October 2024 and apparently have these striking white coats.
White coats. Interesting.
And then a bit later, January 2025, a female pup named Khaleesi arrived.
Khaleesi. Okay, Game of Thrones again.
Seems like it. And the company made a pretty bold statement, calling these pups the world's first successfully de-extincted animal.
That is quite a claim. World's first. And the process, it sounds incredibly complex, involving ancient DNA.
Yeah, that's the core of it. They reported extracting DNA from fossils that are incredibly old,
How old are we talking?
going back as far as 72,000 years, apparently.
Mm-hmm.
They specifically mentioned getting genetic info from a 13,000-year-old tooth
Wow.
and an even older 72,000-year-old skull.
Yeah.
So this ancient DNA was basically the starting blueprint.
But it wasn't just extracting DNA and, presto, a dire wolf appears.
Not at all. It involves some really cutting-edge stuff, cloning, gene editing.
Applied specifically to gray wolves, right, because they're the closest living relatives.
That's a key point, yeah. They didn't just make a dire wolf out of nothing. They used the gray wolf's genetic framework.
And tweaked it.
Exactly. Made very specific changes based on that ancient dire wolf DNA they recovered.
Okay, and where were these pups born? Not just a standard lab.
No, Colossal has this large 2,000-acre facility. They describe it as highly secure, constantly monitored.
Monitored.
Things like zoo-grade fencing, security staff, even drones and live cameras watching over the area.
Serious setup.
It seems so. And interestingly, it's certified by the American Humane Society and registered with the USDA.
That suggests they're taking the animal welfare and security side pretty seriously.
Yeah, it points in that direction.
Okay, so we have these pups. They seem to be doing well in this secure place. Let's dig a bit deeper into the science. How did they actually bridge that gap from ancient genetic code to, well, living pups?
Well, the first huge step for the scientists was basically reconstructing the dire wolf genome.
Which must have been tough, with ancient DNA being degraded and fragmented.
Exactly. A massive challenge. They pieced together 2 high-quality dire wolf genomes by comparing those ancient bits with the full genetic maps of living canids.
Like gray wolves, jackals.
Right. Gray wolves, jackals, foxes. That comparison let them pinpoint the specific genetic differences. What made a dire wolf a dire wolf?
And how much DNA did they actually share? The dire wolf and the gray wolf. I think I saw slightly different numbers.
Yeah, Colossal themselves said about 99.5% shared DNA.
Okay.
But one expert quoted in CNN, Love Dellen, mentioned 99.9%, specifically referring to the gray wolf genome proportion in these new pups.
So either way, almost identical. The vast majority is gray wolf DNA.
Pretty much. The crucial part was identifying that tiny percentage difference, those specific genes that gave the dire wolf its unique look and characteristics.
And Colossal's chief science officer, Beth Shapiro, she said something about not aiming for a perfect replica.
Right. She mentioned the goal wasn't a 100% genetic match, but creating functional copies by focusing on those key defining traits.
So a very targeted approach, zeroing in on the genes for things like size, build.
Precisely. They used CRISPR technology, then a super precise gene editing tool to make around 20 specific edits.
Just 20 edits? Across how many genes?
In 14 different genes, apparently.
Yeah.
The whole idea was to nudge the gray wolf genetic profile closer to the dire wolf's.
Okay, so they edit the gray wolf cells. What's next? Cloning.
That's the next critical step. They took unfertilized eggs from domestic dogs.
Domestic dogs, not wolves.
Right, domestic dogs. They removed the nucleus, the dog's original DNA, and then inserted the nucleus from the edited gray wolf cell into that empty egg.
So the embryo basically had the edited gray wolf DNA inside a dog's egg cell.
That's a good way to think about it. These reconstructed eggs started developing into embryos.
And then transferred to surrogate mothers.
Exactly. In this case, they used large mixed-breed hounds as the surrogates.
Was it successful right away?
It sounds like it took some effort. They mentioned 8 separate embryo transfers, using an average of about 45 embryos each time.
Wow. That really shows the complexity. It's not a simple push-button process.
Definitely not. A lot of work went into getting those 3 successful pregnancies.
So now we have these 3 pups. Colossal calls them de-extincted dire wolves, but based on the science, is that the most accurate term? Maybe?
Hybrids? That's the word that keeps coming up in the scientific discussion, yeah. Probably the most accurate way to understand them.
Because they're mostly gray wolf, genetically.
Right. As Lovedalen pointed out, 99.9% gray wolf genome. The scientists themselves say they're fundamentally hybrid animals.
Well, they look more like dire wolves.
They carry those specific dire wolf genes that make them look more like dire wolves than anything alive in, 13,000 years?
Okay, which brings us to the actual physical differences. The Times of India had a good comparison. Size was a big one, right?
A huge difference. Dire wolves were much larger, maybe up to 150 pounds. A typical gray wolf is more like 60 to 100 pounds.
And their build?
More robust. Massive skull and jaws, built for bigger prey. Sturdier, more muscular legs. Gray wolves are leaner, longer legs, more built for endurance running.
What about coat color?
Evidence suggests dire wolves were possibly light-colored, maybe almost white. Gray wolves are more typically gray, black, or white. And of course, the teeth and jaw strength were adapted for larger prey too.
So are these new pups showing these kinds of classic dire wolf features?
Apparently, yes.
Yeah.
Several of them. Remus and Romulus have those distinctive white coats, for example.
Huh.
They're also starting to show larger shoulders, more muscular, thicker legs. And Colossal mentions specific craniofacial features, bigger skull, powerful jaws.
That's remarkable. What about sound?
Interestingly, yes. They noted the vocalizations of Romulus and Remus. Their whines and howls are thought to be linked to those dire wolf genetic components they carry.
Fascinating. Even their sounds might echo the past. What about behavior? Are they acting like ancient predators?
Well, not fully yet. Matt James, Colossal's chief animal officer, described them as habituated to people, but definitely not tame.
Habituated, not tame. Okay.
He said the older two explore more but still come back for feeding. And he noted they seem more standoffish, maybe a bit skittish, compared to gray wolf pups at the same age.
So still developing.
Yeah, his expectation is that as they mature, especially with hormonal changes, more inherent behaviors might emerge.
Sounds like there's still a lot to learn as they grow, which leads us to the broader scientific view. I imagine there's some discussion, maybe debate, about what resurrected really means here.
Oh, absolutely. As Lovedalen pointed out, there's likely going to be an ongoing debate about how many genetic changes you need to actually call it a dire wolf again.
Kind of a philosophical question, too.
He framed it exactly like that, part philosophical, part scientific. Some experts, like Dallin, suggest Colossal has effectively resurrected the dire wolf phenotype.
The observable traits, the look.
Right. Colossal argues they've brought back the functional essence by targeting those 20 or so specific genetic variants. That's also kind of make the point that these species labels are human constructs anyway, useful but maybe not absolute lines.
And it's important to remember, as Medinia pointed out, dire wolves weren't just big gray wolves. They were a distinct species.
Totally distinct. Genetic analysis shows they split off from gray wolves about 5.7 million years ago.
5.7 million, wow.
And crucially, the evidence suggests they didn't interbreed with gray wolves or other canids. Some research even hints they might be closer to African jackals genetically.
Really? Jackals?
Yeah. And Medinia also noted dire wolves were likely solitary, highly specialized for their environment. That specialization might have actually hurt them in the end.
Made them less adaptable than gray wolves when the climate shifted.
That's the thinking. Gray wolves were more adaptable, survived those changes. Dire wolves, maybe not so much.
So these new pups are this incredible mix of ancient genes and modern tech. What are the wider implications? Colossal must have bigger plans for this
For
technology.
sure. One of their main goals is using this tech for conserving endangered species now.
How so?
They've already announced producing cloned litters of red wolves, which are critically endangered using a less invasive cloning method they developed during the dire wolf work.
That's a really interesting, potentially powerful application.
It really is. The potential to boost genetic diversity in small populations, maybe even edit out harmful mutations or add adaptive traits, it could be a huge conservation tool.
But there must be caveats.
Oh, definitely. Michael Knapp from University of Otago pointed out limitations. Tweaking genes for one trait might have unintended side effects. And often, it's not just the species that's gone, but the whole ecosystem it fit into.
Right. And then there are the ethical questions. Just because we can do this.
Doesn't automatically mean we should. That's a major point raised in the CNN piece. Concerns about the ecological role of these hybrids if they were ever released.
Especially with existing issues managing gray wolf populations.
Exactly. Christopher Preston, an environmental philosopher, questioned their ecological purpose in today's world. Plus, there's the debate about funding. Could this money be better spent on preventing current extinctions?
That's a valid point. The resource allocation question?
And animal welfare, of course, for the surrogates, too, though Preston did acknowledge Colossal seems to be taking welfare seriously with their facility.
It really feels like we're just at the start of something big. A new era of genetic possibility, but with a lot of unknowns and ethical stuff to figure out.
Definitely. And Colossal isn't stopping here. They're also working on mammoths, dodos, Tasmanian tigers.
So the Direwolf project is like a proof of concept.
It really seems that way, demonstrating their whole end-to-end de-extinction technology stack, as they call it. It'll be fascinating to see how they tackle those other species, each with its own unique challenges.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, what's the main takeaway for now?
For me, it's that Colossal has done something scientifically remarkable. They've created these fascinating hybrid animals with clear, dire wolf traits using incredibly advanced techniques. It's a huge step in de-extinction tech. But it's absolutely crucial to remember these are not identical copies. They're essentially a new kind of animal, showing our growing power to understand and, well, manipulate life itself.
And for me, the real aha moment is realizing de-extinction, right now anyway, isn't about perfect copies. It's more about bringing back functional and phenotypically similar creatures. And the potential conservation angle is really significant.
Absolutely. Which really leaves you thinking. What are the real ethical and ecological implications here? What does bringing back a species mean if it's not genetically identical? And what responsibilities come with this power?
That is a powerful thought to end on. If we can recreate aspects of extinct life, does that change how we view extinction itself? Our duty to prevent it now, it really makes you ponder the limits and the possibilities of this new genetic era. Thanks so much for diving into this with me.